So thank you all very much for coming to the kickoff of the 7th year of Ecoscholars. And real quick, this I know there's no sound coming. This is okay. This is not a technical problem. We are actually filming tonight's event, and we'll hear more about that in a second from my colleague here. But really, this is for the video. So yeah, small enough room, you can all hear me. So I just like to say, my name is Nick Evans. I'm co-coordinator of the Ecoscholars Network, along with Katrina Uphold in the back there. And I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everybody who's come out. Thank you so much. And we're excited about our presenters and a great discussion that we're sure to have. Just I'd like to say a few words to what Ecoscholars is and where we are. We are currently at Ecologic Institute, and Ecoscholars is a network of scholars and young professionals that work in environmentally related fields, sustainability, energy policy, climate policy, and also international relations related fields in either studying or already working. And it's hosted by the Ecologic Institute. And we put on, we run by the academic calendar, which means that we also cater to fellows that come through Berlin just for a year, but we also cater to students, and we run by the academic calendar. So this is the kickoff of the next year, even though it's certainly not the beginning of the year. And we will go until then this summer, and then we have a break. And so we put on events like this. We host speakers and we have guest lecturers, but we also facilitate and organize field trips and other things around Berlin and events around Berlin. And then also we have a monthly Stammtisch, which for the non-German speakers is a gathering or a discussion or a round table, so to speak, at various cafes and bars. And these are always very informal and very nice evenings where we discuss environmentally related topics, and we try to cover a wide variety of issues. So we've talked about everything from the common agricultural policy to what's happening on the high seas in terms of marine protection and everything in between. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to my colleague Andreas Graf, and he's going to talk a little bit about ELEEP.
So hello, I'm Andreas Graf, and I'm a researcher here at Ecologic Institute working on climate and energy issues. And I'm also partially responsible for a network that's of a slightly different nature than Ecoscholars, namely ELEEP, which stands for the Emerging Leaders in Energy and Environment Program. And this is a network of young professionals and emerging leaders working on climate and energy issues on both sides of the Atlantic. So it's mainly in the cloud, a virtual network of people, not only based in Berlin, but rather engaging in a variety of in dialogue on energy and climate issues in a variety of different formats, from study tours to an online Facebook platform, as well as events like these. And this is part of funding that's, or a program made possible by funding from the European Commission, as well as the Robert Bosch Foundation. We have teamed up with Ecoscholars tonight because the core of our network is to focus on transatlantic issues, and what better setting than here with our director, who a preeminent expert and experienced negotiator on climate issues from the European side, as well as someone with great knowledge of the American positions, and this right before the COP. And but not to go on forever, I would love to hand this over now to Katrina, who can then introduce our speakers more.
First of all, I want to thank everyone for coming. It's really nice of you to join us on this evening. And I know some of you are missing class, so yay for choosing us. I'm here to quickly present our speakers for tonight. The first that we have is our esteemed director of Ecologic Institute, Dr. Camilla Bausch. She just took over the director position here at Ecologic, and she's doing a wonderful job. Love it. She has over 10 years experience working as a researcher, consultant, and lecturer in the fields of environmental, climate, and energy policy. I have my cheat sheet notes you can see, both at the national, European, and international levels. So she's got quite a bit of experience to share with us tonight. She also has acted extensively on legal and institutional issues in the context of international climate protection for many years, as well as part of the German delegation at the UN climate negotiations. So that's quite rewarding. Furthermore, she was active in the introduction and reform of the emissions trading system in Germany, as well as ongoing developments in energy law. And on top of that, to round out her excellent previous experience, she was a board member of Greenpeace Germany, as well as the co-founder of Climate Talk event series. So we are extremely excited and honored to have her speak with us tonight on what to expect for the upcoming Convention of the Parties Talk 21 in Paris. After that, we have our American side, Emma Zinsmeister. She's been working at the US EPA Office of Air and Radiation since 2008. She is the lead local climate strategy analyst for US EPA's state and local climate energy program. That's a mouthful. And she specializes in climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies for communities across the United States, which I think we'll be hearing a bit more about tonight. Her work focuses on creating peer exchange opportunities and technical guidance to help local governments, one, reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, two, increase their resilience to extreme weather events, and lastly, to advance their clean energy goals. She helped create resource documents for local governments which aid in selecting and implementing greenhouse gas reduction strategies in the areas of energy efficiency, renewable energy, transportation, community planning and design, and solid waste management materials. So you also have quite an extensive background. I could not have memorized this in one day. So I'm excited to hear about what you have to say about the upcoming talks in Paris. And I hope everyone is relaxed enough to understand that this is a very informal meeting as well. So if you have questions, we'll have a question and answer session at the end. Feel free to save it until then. And yeah, hope you have a great time. Without further ado.
Good evening, everybody. It's a real pleasure to welcome you here at Ecologic Institute. And I think it's especially nice because this format is reaching across institutes, disciplines, and country borders. And I think that's exactly what we need for environmental issues. So it's lovely to have you. And it's lovely to have somebody representing the US Embassy here tonight to help us learn also to understand the insights from the other side of the Atlantic, to build bridges across the oceans. So that's beautiful to be here, and that's also what international negotiations are all about: build bridges which we can walk upon to move together. So let's talk first a little bit about why we are negotiating. Who is actually in this room following negotiations a bit more closely, having maybe been there once or twice? So, half a handful. So, you have more experience. Please bear with me when I start at the very beginning, and please ask difficult question at the end to Emma.
I'll take this.
So first, why are we actually negotiating? First thing, why we are negotiating at the international level is because global climate change is a challenge which you cannot solve at national level alone. And science strongly urges us to act quickly and swiftly and quite radically to change our economic system to prevent dangerous interference with the climate system. And is there anybody who is actually in doubt of the human impact on the climate system? Good, then we don't have to open that box. Because I think unless you do your own research and have your own findings, then okay. For all others, I think it would be a challenging task to take this position, as there are so many scientists who have proven that the other fact is right. So anyway, we don't have to enter this. This is good. This is good. Good news for me for here tonight. So we do that because science tells us, and we need to tackle that globally because nationally we cannot really, different to other environmental problems, we cannot really solve this problem. Second, we negotiate to create a dynamic at international level. So don't think the only thing what we do at international negotiations is produce a paper. No, we have actually a hook there to bring the topic onto the political agenda again and again and again. So it's the perpetuation of pushing this issue. That's also one value of the negotiations. It's also to bring that up to the attention at regional level. So groups start getting together there. Groups start forming an opinion on certain issues. So that's also a value. And last but certainly not least, you take decisions and, in certain occasions, pass new agreements in the form of treaties. That's not a daily business, but it's an important one. So that's why we get together to negotiate. Now we get together in Paris with two aims. We want to have a new agreement and we want to have decisions. So it's both. So this is a big meeting because this is not what we do on a daily basis when we negotiate on climate issues. To kind of give you a little bit of a framing, I want to say where we come from before I want to talk about where we are. So where do we come from? In the beginning of the 90s, countries came together and adopted the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And this was basically a framework saying we want to avoid dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. It took quite a while to understand what dangerous is in this context. It took quite a while to understand that there is anthropogenic interference. But by now, I think it's generally accepted, and the limit which the international community put itself was not exceed a temperature rise on a global medium, a temperature rise of 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. So that's our limit. We do not want to cross this limit. So that's what we try to do. That's what was established under the UNFCCC. But the UNFCCC, it's a framework convention. It was already clear. Details are lacking. For example, national commitments. And it's always, if you have an international goal but no national commitments, it's kind of like everybody looks to the other and says, well, I do something, but it doesn't add up to the ambition you need. So they started right away negotiating the Kyoto Protocol under the Berlin Mandate, by the way, and Angela Merkel took that on. So our leader has experience as a climate negotiator, which is good news. And it was in Berlin, which is also good news, because Berlin is always good news. So we adopted the Kyoto Protocol in 1997. But as you all know, it took quite a while for it to enter into force, because you had a certain number of countries to ratify it and a certain amount of emission being covered. And since the US had difficulties ratifying an agreement they agreed to, it took Russia to make the entry into force happen, and they also, took their time. But anyway, in 2005 it entered into force, putting down some binding commitments, obligations for countries. In this case, industrialized countries. For example, Germany. Now we went on, but in the Kyoto Protocol it was already clear it was only for a first commitment period in the beginning 2008 to 2012 that they had the obligation laid out. So the question was, what happens after that? And now there were two streams of negotiation going on. One is for the second commitment period. We do have a second commitment period now. It goes on to 2020, and we try to negotiate. But unfortunately, politically, the Kyoto Protocol couldn't convince the US, and in this context, it couldn't really convince the international community to be the solution of the future. By the way, also for other reasons, but that was one important reason. So it was clear, while we do negotiate a second commitment period, and we do have it now, we need something else. It turned also out that the emissions covered by the second commitment period are so minor, we really will not solve the problem with that. But the EU tries to ratify it right now. But it was clear we need something else but the Kyoto Protocol, especially for the time after 2020, because the second commitment period went on until 2020 now. So that is what we are negotiating right now. What is our vision for a future global regime which governs climate change and which governs the political ambition to fight climate change and the need to adapt to climate change? So that's where we are at right now. But are we there the first time in history? No. We had an experience before. We had Copenhagen. Did anybody remember what happened? Does anybody remember what happened in Copenhagen? Okay, the photographer knows. That's excellent. Of course, you're going to talk about your vision on that. But any of the participants? Yes, please.
Yeah, they couldn't forge a treaty. America backed out, China backed out, and they had the Copenhagen Accord, which was internal agreement. But countries made their own agreements, but it wasn't a treaty and it wasn't binding.
That's so true. That's so true. Copenhagen, actually, we went there. It was a lead up via Bali. I negotiated in Bali. Beautiful place to negotiate. But make sure the press doesn't take picture, because while you're working really hard, it looks you're on holidays. And we were very successful in Bali 2 years before Copenhagen, in 2007. By the way, the year where Germany had the double presidency, they were both in Europe and for the G7, then G8, the presidency, and they were really pushing the agenda and were quite successful, and the international community as well, despite some hurdles they had to jump over. In 2007, there was a wonderful mandate for negotiation for a future treaty. Pretty well laid out what we want to negotiate on and what we want to achieve, and it should be a future treaty, actually helping to save the world. Nothing less. A whole treaty, everything in it. Now we negotiated 2 years, and there was a great hope that this topic would get highest level political attention. The probability was pretty low. But for many reasons, in 2007, some of you might remember the film An Inconvenient Truth. In 2007, some of you might remember the IPCC report then, or the Stern report. For many reasons, a dynamic was created, which actually over 2 years brought a lot of public attention to the topic and the highest level political attention, leading to a situation that far more than 100 heads of state turned up in Copenhagen. That's incredible. That's incredible for an environmental topic, hello? So that could have been a great success. And since President Obama was showing up, many in the US said he wouldn't show up if it's not a done deal. There's going to be a great success. So hopes were high, and then organization was a disaster. The presidency, the Danes, who headed the COP, did not have enough experience and were not humble enough to take advice, and were very badly chairing this conference. And positions were too far apart. Basically, we wanted to swallow too much at one point, right away. And when really ministers and heads of state arrived at negotiations, we still had hundreds of pages of unresolved issues in front of us. And that led to a terrible situation. There was not enough appetite in the room yet to agree on the big breakthrough. And the result was quite disastrous, really, heads of state taking then this as a podium, as a forum to talk about their general vision of the world and bash each other. Because obviously we all know there are very many different ways how countries want to see the world to develop, and so that was quite a disaster, and everybody who was involved, who had worked like crazy late nights for months and some years, all these people who really put in a lot of effort and time and were quite devastated, and it was not clear if the UN negotiations could pick up afterwards again. But luckily enough, a year later in Cancun, we had the Mexican presidency, and they took not the environmental minister as, leading the negotiations, but the foreign minister, who was very good in diplomacy, which was really needed now. It was not about content, it was about diplomacy and bringing the world together again, so we have a forum remaining to negotiate this really urgent problem. And so that was quite a success, again with some hurdles to be overcome, but Espinosa, who was at that time chairing that, she did an incredible job, and by the way, she is now ambassador in Berlin. So we were rewarded with her, which is excellent. And so after Cancun, it was clear, okay, we still can negotiate under the UNFCCC as a heading, and we still, and that was also an agreement, we still have a big task in front of us. So then the world got more humble, said we have to listen more to what countries are willing to contribute. So instead of what they called in former times a top-down approach, let's listen to what comes bottom-up from the countries, be not punitive, be not so much into obligations, commitments, be not all of that, but be more bottom-up, listen, encourage, push in a softer way, bottom-up. So, and then there was an agreement, let's have a new agreement or something of legal form in Paris. So that's where we are now. We are trying again. Why is it so different to Copenhagen? Does anybody have a gut feeling here in the room why it's so different than Copenhagen? Before Copenhagen, you please.
Many reasons. One of them is economics have changed tremendously for renewables. For example, you see a lot of efforts in the US and China you didn't see 5 years ago. So they also, for domestic issues, air quality is just a huge issue in China. So they've started tackling coal production and for other reasons too, but also for climate change. So there's more willingness on that. Also think it's not so much pressure in the negotiations this time because it's not actually binding emission targets. But I mean, you're going to talk about it, right?
No, that's fine. You talk about it. That's
so,
good.
They have these INDCs,
intended nationally
determined contributions. So basically, countries set their own emission targets, and they will be put down, but they're not going to be binding. And that is, of course, on one hand, that's a disadvantage. On the other hand, it might make them more willing to actually bring something to the table. So I think there's a lot of reasons why things look different this time.
There was a hand over here as well. Yes.
The clock is ticking.
Yeah, it sure is.
Less and less time to make a move. The EIA came out in 2012 and said nothing changes before 2017. We're on track to exceed 2 degrees.
Yeah.
I would say just the changes that have happened in the US over the past year or so, the things that Obama has done. I think maybe he's more ready now, or is at least putting more commitment from his side. And I think when you have a big superpower saying, okay, this is something that's important, that it kind of gives a new sort of perspective to the talks.
Yes, I think the legacy term makes it easier if you're on that. But we're going to hear, of course, more about this. So it's different starting points, different expectations, different presidency, the French presidency trying to be very open, very party-driven, that's the point, party-driven, and transparent, very transparent, and then all the points you three have alluded to. Exactly, so it's a very different mood. It's a very different aim, what we are aiming for, just a step into the right direction, not the solution, what we hoped for in Copenhagen, and a very different setting of the world and in the approach we take. So now, what are actually the topics which are on the table? One is obviously who contributes what. The first thing is actually the format, will we have a treaty or not? There was some confusion after Minister Kerry had some mentioning in the newspapers about if the US is actually opposing a treaty. Then I heard internally that Todd Stern actually said, no, the position remained the same. This was just wrongly reported by the newspaper, but you will have more on that. Maybe. And maybe it's under, you know, it's not all yet decided so. But basically it's who contributes what. Now contribution, what does that mean? You can contribute to mitigation efforts, or you can contribute financially or in other ways. You might think of, we think of technology, cooperation, capacity building, kind of these things. So, but let's talk first about financing and particularly about mitigation. Who contributes what? In the past, there was a quite clear divide between Annex I countries, industrialized countries, broadly, and non-Annex I countries, developing countries, roughly. And that was the logic the regime worked in for a long time, and it said it's a reflection of the common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. CBDR you will hear often, or CBDR and RC. Now, for a long time, I think since Durban, countries said, well, but the world has changed so much, and it's so evident that we need real contributions also from economies like China. We cannot really stick to the Annex I, non-Annex I divide, looking at the challenge ahead. It doesn't mean everybody has to do the same thing, and it doesn't mean everybody has to do it on their own budget. But we have to move away from Annex I, non-Annex I, which was just with the years passing and the countries and the world changing, not adequate anymore. And now countries have decided, okay, let's say all parties have to contribute. And the interesting part, it already reflects in reality, and I want to mention that because that is already an achievement. For example, we have the Green Climate Fund, one of the funds where money should flow through to support climate action or adaptation needs. Countries like Mexico or other even developing countries contributed to the Green Climate Fund, made pledges to the Green Climate Fund, which shows they accepted we also bear responsibility, or we want to contribute. We want to make a sign, we want to contribute. And then the other thing is, you already alluded to the INDCs, the intended nationally determined contributions. We have by now 140 INDCs submitted from more than 160 countries. Why more countries? Because, for example, the EU has 28 member states, and if they have an INDC, it's more countries than INDCs. Thinking that we have 194 member states of the UNFCCC, of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, you see that the vast majority has already submitted their INDC, meaning that a lot of countries who are in the developing world or who are non-Annex I countries have also submitted their INDCs. That's excellent. That shows that there is a willingness to politically follow up on the idea that it's all countries. So that's positive. Let's see if we can get that into the agreement. But that's certainly the goal. Now, the second thing is, what ambition do we want to have? I'm pretty sure we're going to get the 2-degree limit, because that has been, I would say, agreed already quite a while ago, but you still have to negotiate, because everything is negotiated. But what does that mean with respect to emission reduction and with respect to our vision of the future? I would love to see more details on the long-term vision. For example, that we want to move towards climate neutrality or carbon neutrality. Science tells us we should move to carbon neutrality. This is, however, still very controversially negotiated. If we get numbers, or at least words in there which kind of specify this 2-degree in a bit more detail. Now, then about the bindingness of the contributions, we already heard here that we probably will not have a Kyoto-style treaty. That's, I think, by now quite clear. But what kind of commitment do we have connected to these contributions? How do we frame them? How can we look at them from an international level and evaluate the progress? How can we look at the cumulative effect and the national implications? all of this. So really the legal value of these INDCs, or the commitments you take with these contributions, and also the monitoring, reporting, verification of that, the review of that, all of this is still under negotiations and quite controversial. But I think where it's clear you won't get the Kyoto style, but how close can you get to a treaty which actually gives you something at hand to verify, to evaluate, and to ramp up ambition? Because already now, looking at the INDCs which have been put forward, they don't suffice to get to the 2-degree world. We know that it's only a step. It's not yet the solution. So we need ambition mechanism. Now, so we are still negotiating that, and I also assume, since these are contributions which will take effect from 2020 on, I know that there will not be all the details we need, for example, for the monitoring, reporting, and verification, or for the review. So we have to set the framing now and then start detailing that in the years to come. So by 2020 we have a good foundation to walk upon. That, by the way, is not unusual. We had that for the Kyoto Protocol as well. And then we had a lot later the Marrakesh Accords, which had all the details for the market mechanisms and the like. So that is not so unusual. Now, what is also important, of course, is financing. How do we deal? Who has followed a bit the financing issue? Money? Oh, yes, here. Our money guy, please.
Oh, well, just shortly, but it seems like up until the last 3 years, trying to public financing was the main focus, and that maybe in the last 5 years, the idea of trying to leverage private financing has become more a target.
Very good, very important point. Sometimes forgotten that that's a leverage, and private financing is also important. Can you, by chance, link that to the Copenhagen Accord somehow?
Yeah, there were, just on a very meta level, there was a lot of disputes over how the funding was going to work, with the country groupings as well. Annex 1 a lot of the Annex 1 countries were very reluctant to commit to financing deals with non-Annex countries.
Yeah.
And I guess the private sector was also not tied in.
So that now changes quite a bit. So also in the thinking, there's quite a big awareness that non-national actors, be it subnational or private actors, have to be engaged. We need private money to flow. And the interesting thing in this context is one number which was established by the Copenhagen Accord. It's a 100 billion of money flowing into developing countries to support them in their action. Now you ask yourself, 100 billion, and that Hillary Clinton brought to the table, and then it was enshrined in the Copenhagen Accord, which was taken note of, but then became kind of the reference point for the future, and is now widely agreed, this 100 billion. Dollar, by the way. US dollar. These 100 billion, where do they come from? Some people sometimes mistake it for 100 billion from public funds. That's not the case. That's not what it's meant. It's 100 billion from public and private sources. So also the Green Climate Fund also will never channel 100 billion from public sources just to straighten it up, because there's some kind of misunderstanding in the world over this one. But obviously that's the question, how do we build up the pathway towards 2020 when we have this 100 billion, and what will happen after that? Is that the bottom line and later it will be more? Or is that just a point in time and then we'll see? And so I think that will be part of the negotiations, and it seems that we are moving toward an understanding that this is the bottom line of flows. But now they also try to understand how the flows are going. There's quite a bit of analysis being done, not so easy. Now I'm trying to come to an end because we have our lovely co-speaker here, and she has a lot to say. Just to mention it very briefly, obviously adaptation and the connected topic or not connected topic, depending on who you talk to, of loss and damage, meaning losing basically your country and what to do with the damage done to you, not through your action, but through action of others. That is also part of the negotiations, and especially developing countries, which are particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate change, always request the other countries to acknowledge that adaptation has to be paid as much attention to as mitigation, because they actually can barely mitigate because they have no emissions, but they have to adapt. So that's, and many of them want loss and damage to be a separate topic, and I assume it will be, because they hope that there will possibly be financial flows independent of the financial flows for adaptation. So that is another big topic one could dwell upon. Now, I just want to highlight a few positive things for the road ahead. Obviously, the situation is still very complex. We have still quite a number of open issues. Some people are positive and came back from the pre-COP, where some high-level people met with quite a positive spirit that something will happen. Others are quite nervous about what can still be achieved, thinking of the open issues yet. But I think we should keep in mind that there are some positive dynamics already in the market. We talked about the many INDCs, but I also want to mention that in 2014, China and the US had a joint agreement. That was a breakthrough. That was created pretty good ground that they want to actually talk to each other and move with each other. You might highlight that later on a bit. Then we had, with the G7 this year, a decarbonization vision enshrined in their declaration, which is incredible. I mean, these are industrialized countries, highly industrialized countries, saying they want to decarbonize in the course of the century. So that's positive. We have the Sustainable Development Goals at UN level being passed this year. I cannot dwell on that now because it's quite another topic, but that means another big stream of international agreement. By the way, politically, it is a political agreement, not a binding agreement, legally binding agreement, that this can support the dynamic if they are implemented properly. We have an incredible fall of prices for solar panels and renewables. You alluded to that, so that will be very helpful, instrumental, by the way, to be successful in climate protection if we can be. We have in the Norwegian, the biggest state fund in the world is the Norwegian pension fund, and they decided to decarbonize. That's called divestment. So there are certain areas where there are movement away from financing coal to financing more sustainable ways of energy. That's positive. We have the Pope's encyclical. Very inspiring. And by the way, for countries which are highly coal dependent and very conservative, very Catholic, not conservative, Catholic, like Poland. That's a very important paper or inspiration. So we have the encyclical, and we have a lot of subnational level, and you also mentioned that we have co-benefits which are very important for many countries, like also China, like the health benefit moving away from coal and the like. So I think there are some positive things despite the dynamics of the negotiations, which might help us fighting climate change successfully. But certainly it's not a given, because all analysis said we are not yet on track. And with this happy note, I hand over to Emma.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all tonight. It's a real honor to be here, and it's also very rewarding to speak to a group of emerging leaders. As Camilla mentioned, and as I was introduced, I am actually with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. I'm on a short fellowship here through the U.S. Embassy. And back at the EPA, we have an Emerging Leaders program as well, and it's a great forum to bring together people to talk about important emerging issues and to really, provide young, new leaders with the skills to really have influence on these topics into the future. So it's a great opportunity to talk to you. Camilla mentioned a lot of things that I was going to mention as well, so I will not harp on all the same points, but what I can do, talk about with you tonight, is to share a little bit about what the U.S. perspective is going into the COP coming up, how our position has sort of changed over time, and then talk a little bit more specifically about what the U.S. is doing to ensure success of meeting our own targets and the agreement overall, specifically what what some of our new policies are. There's been a lot of work through the Obama administration to really take a much more serious and dedicated approach to addressing climate change, and that has really changed the mood, and there's a lot of new activity in the US that's been going on to back that up. So to start off, as Camilla highlighted, for many, many reasons, there's a lot more optimism and enthusiasm going into this round of negotiations. I think the US really coming on board with strong commitments and working particularly with China to make a joint announcement what both countries will be contributing in terms of their INDCs is really huge. It's a major shift in the tone and the participation. And I think also this approach of INDCs, sort of the bottom-up approach, is a very smart approach because it enables each country to come forth and put forth a commitment that they know that they can meet based on their capabilities and then address that over time. I think that is really one of the major points that can help address some of the concerns from previous rounds of negotiations. The Kyoto Protocol style of having sort of top-down commitments really brought up these discussions of burden sharing, created division along sort of the annexed and non-annexed countries, and I think that was really the point that where the US was really not on board with the idea of making commitments when other emerging emitters were not doing the same. So in terms of where the US position is right now, we have submitted our INDC, which is a commitment to reduce our emissions, our economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions by 26 to 28% over 2005 levels by 2025. And we are currently on track to meet our interim target, which we have, which is a 17% reduction over 2005 levels by 2020. And these targets and this pathline puts us on a longer-term trajectory to meet emissions reductions of about 80% by 2050, which is in line with what we're hoping to see for long-term decarbonization. So that's the commitment that we have put forth right now. And that is based on an assessment that was done of all of the legal authority that's already existing in the United States. What kinds of policies do we have in place that we can work on to make sure that we reduce these emissions without needing new legal authority, without needing any new legislation, without needing congressional action? What can federal agencies do right now to reach these targets? And so I'll get into some of those examples a little bit later, but they are significant new policies for the United States. And so in terms of what we're looking for going into the negotiations, I think the top line issue is really ambition, making sure that countries are putting forth really ambitious and meaningful commitments that do keep in mind this long-term target of decarbonization. And with the acknowledgement that as the commitments as they stand right now from the countries that have submitted INDCs don't get us to that 2-degree centigrade target, but we are certainly making huge strides when business as usual would put us at 4 to 5 degrees. So we are really we're making much more progress, but there's more to be done. And so in line with that, this process of regular review and verification of emissions reductions and making sure that countries are coming back to the table every 5 years to review what they've achieved, can they ramp up their targets over time, what new policies can be put into place to ensure further action, I think is a really huge piece of that as well. And along with that, transparency, making sure that every country has, to participate in the same sort of reporting framework so that we're able to ensure that a ton emitted in one country is the same as a ton emitted in any other country. And part of that process is really making sure that we're putting forth a framework that encourages participation by every country. The previous sort of annex, non-annex division really prevented that. And in terms of how a structure for this type of agreement can take shape, the US is not in favor of legally binding targets in terms of making each INDC itself legally binding. That has the potential to limit participation and certainly limit ambition of countries who are making commitments. And so that's one piece that is not necessarily in the US perspective ideal for a legally binding nature. But it is possible to create a hybrid type of framework where you do have legally binding requirements to put forth these INDCs, review and report on them on a regular schedule, and make sure that we are going through this process of continuing to ratchet up commitments so that we meet our 2-degree limit on warming. And so I think that is very important. Two other particular issues that Camilla also already mentioned, adaptation. The US is very committed to making sure that there is support for and funding for adaptation-related work coming out of this agreement. The US has been, making has been influential in the establishment of the Green Climate Fund, helping to ensure the initial capitalization of $10 billion. We've made a $3 billion pledge to the fund, and right now I believe the most recent OECD reports that we are mobilizing, globally, the global community is mobilizing $62 billion a year at present. So we are on track to that $100 billion 2020 goal. And then I think, so I think that really it's the ambition, the transparency, and making sure that there's financing, and particularly for adaptation, are some of the key issues that the U.S. really wants to see as part of this agreement coming out of it. And in terms of what the U.S. is actually doing to meet our own commitments and also to support this international process, the U.S. has been very active in not only providing funding for adaptation to communities and for the transfer of clean technologies, but we've also been working a lot on making sure that the technical assistance and data is there. The U.S. has established networks and partnerships for transferring a lot of our data that we can help ensure that, in places like in countries in Asia where we're tracking sea level rise and providing them with the data they need for their planning, or for monitoring crop success in places like Africa. There's a lot of partnerships and programs that have been going on there. And since 2009, we've actually increased our funding and assistance for adaptation efforts by 8-fold. So it's been a really big component of the US perspective. In terms of other things that we are doing domestically to reach our 2025 targets, the major thing that's probably been most talked about recently is our efforts to reduce CO2 emissions from the power sector. And so this is what's known as the Clean Power Plan. It's a regulation that the EPA put forth for the final version of this summer. And this is one of many policies that stems from President Obama's Climate Action Plan. In 2013, he issued a formal plan, which was for the first time in the US, a sort of national level approach to addressing climate change. The history has really been in the US that action has been on the state and local level. Many states across the country have their own climate action plans, have renewable portfolio standards in place to make sure that the power that's being generated in their jurisdictions is coming from renewable sources, other types of energy efficiency standards, building codes. A lot of action has been going on. But with the release of the President's Climate Action Plan in 2013, that outlined direction to federal agencies on what actions do we have the legal authority already to take, and what should we be doing to make sure that we can reach our international commitments. And so, as I mentioned, the Clean Power Plan being sort of the cornerstone of this effort, because it's really looking at our largest source of carbon dioxide emissions. The power sector contributes a third of CO2 emissions to the United States. And carbon dioxide itself is about 82% of US greenhouse gas emissions. So for us to make meaningful reductions tackling the power sector is essential. And just to give you sort of a brief idea of what that regulation looks like, it's really a standard that has been set for coal-fired and natural gas-fired power plants. And the process that we went through to produce this regulation was a very robust 2-year process, involved hundreds of stakeholder meetings, and ultimately a public comment period that produced 4 million public comments that we had to respond to each of those in the process of finalizing the regulation. So this is a huge effort, and it gained a lot of interest from not only just the regulated community, but the American public as well. There's a lot of interest. You mentioned public health issues before, and one of the things that we've really been talking about in the US is, yes, we're reducing carbon emissions from power plants, but we're also addressing other emissions like NOx and SOx, which are the terrible things that kill people, have huge implications for respiratory illnesses and other things. So this type of regulation is really meant to address our biggest source of emissions, and it's an interesting process because it requires, for a lot of environmental regulation in the United States, it's a strong partnership with the federal and state governments. And so EPA sets a standard, the states have to develop plans to meet that standard. And so it gives them the kind of flexibility to work with their utilities and their stakeholders to take the strategies that many of them have a lot of experience using already and craft plans that will be realistic for them. I think the main part of the Clean Power Plan and the US Climate Action Plan overall has been to make sure that we're putting out targets that we feel are ambitious but very achievable, and that we know that we have sort of the will politically, the technical capacity to actually meet these targets. So addressing power plants is one. Fuel efficiency from cars, transportation is certainly our second largest source of emissions. We're in the process of updating fuel efficiency standards for cars that will double fuel efficiency by 2025. We also have a lot of other standards for things like appliances and equipment that are meant to make sure that the appliances you're using in your home and that your industry is using are energy efficient, so that is also being increased. We're also addressing other types of greenhouse gases such as methane. We have a lot of methane emissions from landfills and oil and gas operations. In particular from oil and gas operations, new standards will reduce emissions by about 40 to 45% by 2025. So you can see sort of the US approach is about looking at where are all of the opportunities that we have given our emissions and the sectors that contribute to them. What kind of legal authority do we have in place so that federal agencies can develop regulations and policies that we know that we can then enforce and make sure that we are on track to meet our targets. And so that's really the US approach, and I think that this is a new opportunity, it's a new turning point. It's certainly a priority for President Obama. It's a major legacy issue for him. I think he's come out very strongly in supporting US domestic and international work on this. Has worked not only through the bilateral discussions with China, but with India and Brazil and other countries to really make sure that large emerging emitters are on board as well. And also Secretary Kerry, our Secretary of State, is very engaged on this issue as well, and will be attending the COP in Paris for, I believe he's going to be there the entire 2 weeks. So this is really, truly a high priority issue. So I think that that's where the U.S. sort of stands in terms of what we're doing in the action we're putting forth, what our commitments are, and how we're backing them up. And I think that, personally, I think it's a very optimistic outlook. And I think I might maybe leave it there. So that's just an overview of what the U.S. policy is. And I'm sure you have the difficult questions and sticky questions about U.S. engagement that I'm happy to answer. So. Shall we? Yeah.
Okay. We were told we now make ourselves comfortable here. And you can make us uncomfortable with your questions, or you can ask nice questions, or even comments, by the way. We can also engage in a discussion.
Nick and I will be helping to moderate a little bit. Also, if at any point you want to get up, grab a drink, get some food, go to the bathroom, feel free. It's very important, right? And yes, thank you both for your wonderful speeches. And I'm sure let's open up the floor for discussion. Can we have our first question? Say your name.
Emma. Hi, I'm Eva. I was wondering if there's anything that really stands out to you at the moment in terms of actions that particular states are taking in terms of mitigation. I mean, California's been doing a lot, had a lot going on, especially with the introduction of cap and trade, and also an interesting aspect of financing where they're actually, they've got 300 big emitters putting in like a significant amount of money funding mitigation efforts and that sort of thing. So I know a little bit about that, but is there anything else in terms of what different states are doing that really stands out to you at the moment that's particularly inspiring? Or
Yeah, I think at least from the experience that we've had in the U.S., the real action has been on the state level for many years, and they've very much been on the lead on tackling climate change as a specific issue, and in developing and testing these new policies that we can then look at, how we use those approaches on the federal level. And so certainly there are states that have been very progressive on addressing climate change specifically, and then there are others who may not have been necessarily talking about climate change but taking on other energy efficiency and renewable things. Certainly you mentioned California. The governor there released signed new commitments to targets that are essentially on par with what the EU has committed to in terms of emissions reduction. New York has also done similar things. I think it's really been interesting to watch the development of the cap and trade programs, particularly in the Northeast. They've had a lot of success with those auctions and being able to use the proceeds from those auctions to fund additional investments in energy efficiency and other activities. And I think one real emerging area of interest and concern is as we go through this energy transition and we're looking at bringing on more renewables and really changing how the power sector operates, is how do we make sure that transition is felt equitably among communities, right? Because there are certain lower income communities or communities who may be living closer to power plants, and as things change And as access changes to different sources of energy, we want to make sure that those communities are brought along as well. So I think there have been interesting programs through like the New York Empower program, which really looks at putting funding specifically into making sure that renewables and energy efficiency opportunities are available to these communities. So I think it's been a nice sort of laboratory to look at these communities, and there's a whole host of things, and I can certainly point you to where EPA has sort of collated and organized like, a whole document on these topics, but I'll leave it there. Yeah.
Next question.
I would say Christopher Moore, a former EPA and former Ecologic. And so now my understanding is that one place where the U.S. actually leads Europe is especially with like interpreting and making the effects of climate change very like open and like accessible to the general public. So I was very interested in hearing a bit more. For you to expand a bit more on the climate adaptation work you've been doing as well, on how you're making this available, the guidance documents and the like, your strategy for making this available. Because I mean, the real climate mitigation is obviously the ideal, but at the end of the day, we want to avoid the negative consequences for people in the environment. So.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I think a major approach that EPA in particular has been taking as we talk about climate change as a holistic issue, it's mitigation and adaptation. Communities have to deal with both issues, and it's most effectively done when they are addressed together. So there's been a huge effort across the U.S. government to make sure that we are putting forth the data and the resources that states and communities need to do the kind of planning that it takes to understand how they can effectively address impacts like sea level rise, for example. So then there's been a new a climate resiliency toolkit, it's called, that's been published, where all federal agencies are bringing together the various data sources, analytical tools, and other types of examples of planning processes that communities can use. So there's been a big push to try and make sure that that information is accessible and available to communities. And then also, I think another way that this has been approached is to make sure that we're looking at climate impacts in all of the various programs that we offer. So for example, certain grants that are available for states and communities, having considerations in there of climate impacts. So if you're getting funding for new infrastructure development, have you thought about climate impacts so that your funding design that will be resilient in the future? So I think that's been an effort as well. It's to sort of mainstream the idea of needing to think about the fact that the past is no longer a good predictor of the future, and we need to be looking at projections as part of our planning processes. So it's accessibility, and I think the mainstreaming has really been the two main ways that we've tried to help provide public access to that information.
Maybe if one thinks of subnational action, we have one colleague here in the room, Arne Riedel, who has worked on on subnational action, actually on local action, which was particularly ambitious in helping them to draft their plans and maybe also helping them to implement it. That's a bit more in the future. So maybe you want to allude a bit on the subnational action also in Germany.
Oh, well, did not see that coming, but I'll be happy to. I don't know, I should just sit into the camera now. Can't take pictures of myself. So I don't know, well, Ecologic has been working with master plan municipalities for the last 3 years, basically. So there have been a number of issues on the local level in Germany, of course, as well. So we have a lot of municipalities who took climate action already in the 1990s, following Chernobyl accidents, and then pushing their local agendas forward. But then the German government decided to fund them and to support them financially, starting 2008, basically, with something called the National Climate Initiative. So that's something that developed new. And so in 2012, basically, and that's where we stepped in as well, we basically, did the networking for them. We brought them together. It's a network of 19 municipalities that's going to be expanded next year, and they are basically the high flyers. They are the ones who are doing the most local climate action, and they have very ambitious targets. So they will try actually to implement even beyond Germany's generally considered quite high approach. They will be aiming for 95% greenhouse gas emission reduction until 2050 and 50% energy consumption reduction as well. So, this is even, they are exchanging on the local level, on the regional level, on the European level, and initiatives like the Covenant of Mayors in Europe, for instance, do this, on a much more regional scale as well. So, yeah.
Thank you. In Paris, by the way, tries to bring mayors together in Paris to also highlight the importance of subnational action, which is going on across the world. And they, I think, highlight this in their pillar 4 of their plan, which is exactly for non-state actors, a pillar which is part of the overall understanding how we find a solution for the climate challenge.
Sorry to steal the floor from maybe some questions. I have been struggling with something for a while, and this is, I guess, for both of you. And a lot of the optimism that I see surrounding Paris is that some of the big players have come out of the woodwork, and they're now starting to, the bilateral, the America, US-China bilateral is clearly a big deal. And then, of course, the CPP, Obama CPP, and a lot of this ambition is a positive sign for Paris. But my question is that how there are uncertainties, of course, about the Obama administration is now, he's a lame duck president. We are going to see in the next election cycle, the question you posed right at the beginning, at least a vast majority of the current potential candidates would have said no to your initial question whether or not climate change exists. And so my wondering is does this uncertainty with America being such a big player and the ambition being a positive sign for Paris, is there an understanding of this uncertainty? And of course, CPP is going to be fought out in the courts. And so is that eking into the negotiations at all, or is this not? And I guess it's a question for both of you from the European perspective and then also from the...
Yeah, well, I'll certainly say that the number one question I always get is what happens after the elections? Like, what happens with all these policies, with these new regulations, this new approach that the U.S. has put forth? Like, does that all just evaporate when we get a new president, if that president isn't on board? And so the way that we've approached this is really, as I mentioned, was looking at existing legal authorities and existing opportunities that we have to exercise power that executive agencies already have. So a lot of this is policies that are put into place, and as I think many of you mentioned, there's a lot of momentum already going on that is helping to assist this transition to a low carbon future, right? Prices for implementing new solar have dropped by half in the US since Obama took office. We've seen a 20-fold increase in solar, a threefold increase in wind generation. So the economics are shifting away from coal on their own, and we've seen a lot of that. And so a lot of what we've put into place is already trying to capitalize on these trends economically, capitalize on existing legal authority. And part of things like the Clean Power Plan, that process requires states to work with their utilities and develop these implementation plans. They're going to be submitting the first draft of their plans in September of next year. And so that process requires, integration with utilities. If they already invest millions and millions and millions of dollars every year in their resource planning, looking at, what equipment needs upgrading, what needs to be replaced, what can be retired, how are we planning for the future to ensure secure and reliable power. So they're now working with states as part of this process. And so when you start making plans for investments that are going to last 20 to 30 years, you've already shifted the direction of that planning process. So we're looking at this as having capitalized on momentum, make sure that's going to go through into the future. And so we're very optimistic that these targets that we have set are things that we can meet into the future, regardless of the change in administration. However, how that influences sort of perceptions going forward, particularly in these international negotiations, I think it does create uncertainty, right? Because part of the reason why the Kyoto Protocol did not work the way that we had hoped is that big emitters like the U.S. and China weren't going to sign on to that, and it didn't work out. So
China signed on, but they didn't have commitments in that.
Right. So it's a matter of making sure that all parties can not only make commitments but follow through on them. So the way that the U.S. has structured our new regulations and policies is to make sure that we can follow through into the future. But that is a very real question, and I think I certainly can't predict what the next administration will do or what Congress will do into the future. But we've done everything we can to make sure that we can follow through on the policies that we've put forth based on the new regulations that have come out on power plans for fuel efficiency for vehicles and other things. So we're hoping we will see this momentum continue.
And I think if one sees what's happening, and there was just a poll done by Pew, and they just presented it, and they went to many, many countries in the world looking at how serious do you take climate change, how serious a threat do you think climate change is, does it affect you directly already, all these kind of things. And despite the fact that there is a particular partisan divide in the US, much stronger than it is in Germany, for example, I was quite surprised to see that there are quite a number of people seriously concerned about climate change and do think it will affect them personally in the US. So if that is the voter space, I mean, right now it's a partisan issue, so you will play it partisan. But from what I've heard from the past, that even though outliers are sometimes very popular early in the race, in the end, it's the mainstream candidates which make the race in the end on either side. So thinking of those and thinking of these trends and in parallel the economic trends, despite it being obviously always a challenge to deal with changing governments in international negotiations, and that does not only affect the US, but many governments. I think there is, while one shouldn't be over optimistic or lightheaded, there are signs that we actually will see some stability and that it will not be so easy to, as far as I understand your system, to overcome the steps you have now taken and just take them back, because there's too much dynamic and too much decision work already being done. So, yeah. And it's actually, I think it's a bit more of a question of optimism that the international community knows Obama is in his legacy term, so there are more options on the table than might be on the table in other points of time. So I actually see it as an opportunity.
Hi, Mark. So let's assume that the Paris Agreement goes through and everybody agrees, and there's, the United States on board, China is on board, everybody's there. What would be the implications of this in terms of, for instance, renewable energy deployment? Would there be maybe a drop in, interest rates on renewable energy or easier access to financing? And basically, what would be the next steps then after the Paris Agreement?
So I don't think you will see immediate reactions in the market, because the INDCs have already been put forward, and so you will not have a breakthrough with respect to, say, setting at the global level renewable expansion targets. That's not even on the table, even though it was discussed in some groups. But so I think what will and should come out of Paris is a clear sign about direction, so that the market is not negatively affected by, being nervous about everything falling apart, but rather these INDCs being put into a framework that gives them more credibility. So stabilize the trend the positive trends we are on. And then the next step will be to increase this ambition, to increase these trends and add to that. So I don't think there will be, this global drop of interest rates, because it's nationally driven. So it depends on what countries put on the table and how they design their system. There is no uniformity at a global level, so you will not see a uniformity at interest rates at global level or so, for example. So it will remain diverse, and you will have to, if you're an investor, look at the national conditions to do your project. But if we do have a vision, for example, where we want to go to, and we have these INDCs on the table which get a framing, and we have an ambition mechanism which actually says, in 5 times we want to increase ambition according to our newest knowledge, then you might point the direction where the market and the development is going, and that should encourage investors, while I don't think it's going to be the breakthrough point yet. I think if we want to have clearer signs, we have to act in Europe. We have to act in the US. We have to act, so the national or regional level where you have to increase your action and, for example, improve the emissions trading scheme in Europe. That's what we have to do next year.
Thanks.
Would you agree? I don't know.
Yeah, I think the worst thing for markets is uncertainty. And by having a successful agreement before, you're demonstrating global commitment to a renewable energy future. And I think that just helps to demonstrate that there will be demand for these technologies into the future and to just capitalize, again, on the existing trends that are already in existence. I mean, there's trillions of dollars to be invested in order for countries to meet their targets and for us to sort of hit that 2-degree limit on warming. So I think it sends a clear signal and creates a better momentum, I think, for investments, but it will be sort of market by market, country by country, and each country will make their own sort of domestic investments as well to support domestic industries, I think.
Do we have a technical problem, or are we all right, Andreas? Everything fine? Good. Maybe one little add-on. If you look at the German experience, in 1991 we had a feed-in law for renewables, but the design was flawed or not optimized for expansion of renewables. It had barely any impact. It wasn't actually intended to have a great impact, but it barely had any impact on the expansion of renewables. In the year 2000, we had a new feed-in law, which had a very different design, and suddenly the expansion rates for renewables in the electricity sector exploded because you had high investment security here, which you didn't have under the first law. So I think you have to look very specifically at national design choices to understand how the market might react. And it is certainly so that you will not get these details of agreement or even obligations at international level. So that is not what I would expect from there, but rather the direction, and then look at design choices at the ground. And there we can learn from each other. That's the good thing. We can learn from each other because across the globe we are making more and more experiences with different kind of policy instruments. And since policy has to drive it until we really have it all market ready and competitive, we can learn with each other how to do the best policies we can in the political reality to push this climate agenda.
Yes, right.
Actually, I think we are going to close.
No. Here's an important question.
Film-wise. After we close this, we will continue our discussions, of course, but without the recording. But just until then, I would like to thank Camilla and Emma very much for chatting with us today. And of course, we will continue this a bit later. But yes, and I would also like to thank everyone else for coming. I really appreciate it. So I would like to give you a round of applause.
Then I would like to extend also on record my thanks to the 3 wonderful organizers of this evening. Without you, we wouldn't be and couldn't have this really nice discussion. Thank you.